welcome to The Context USA. I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington.
And I'm Anita McVeigh in London. And tonight, Hillary Clinton is questioned by a congressional committee about Jeffrey Epstein in what the former U.S. Secretary of State describes as partisan political theater. She says the committee should request that President Trump testifies instead.
She says she has no recollection of ever meeting Jeffrey Epstein, that she has no relevant information about any of his crimes or investigations into them.
This isn't just about Democrats. This is about anyone that has any knowledge of Epstein, the investigation. I think we all agree the government failed.
We asked President Trump to testify in front of our committee and be deposed in front of oversight Republicans and Democrats.
And joining us tonight are Annika Green, Republican strategist and founding partner of Reach Global Strategies, and Kurt Bardella, Democratic strategist, publisher of the Watchdog Report on Substack, and former spokesperson and senior advisor for the House Oversight Committee. Welcome to you both.
Welcome to the program. On The Context USA in the next hour, has President Trump's huge military buildup in the Middle East shifted the dial in talks with Iran? A third round of indirect negotiations has been taking place in Switzerland in what's being seen as a last chance for diplomacy.
Also coming up, get the popcorn ready. Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos is at the White House to discuss its bid for Warner Brothers Discovery's assets.
But we start with the former U.S. Secretary of State and First Lady Hillary Clinton testifying before a congressional committee on what she knew about the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. The hearing took place behind closed doors in Chappaqua near the Clintons' home. Her husband, former President Bill Clinton, will testify tomorrow. They're not accused of any wrongdoing.
In an opening statement released on social media as her testimony began, she said she had no recollection of ever meeting Epstein and no personal knowledge of his crimes. She also castigated the House Oversight Committee for failing to question people who did have dealings with him, including President Trump.
She said, "You have compelled me to testify, fully aware that I have no knowledge that would assist you in your investigation, in order to distract attention from President Trump's action and to cover them up, despite legitimate calls for answers."
The Republican-controlled committee issued subpoenas for the Clintons last summer. The couple initially refused, claiming the subpoenas were politically motivated. They subsequently agreed to appear after the committee's chairman, James Comer, threatened to hold them in contempt.
Let's hear what Mr. Comer had to say before heading into the hearing.
This isn't just about Democrats. This is about anyone that has any knowledge of Epstein, the investigation. I think we all agree the government failed. The government failed the victims. And what our role is, we can't prosecute anyone. But what we have been doing is getting transparency to the American people. We subpoenaed the estate. That had nothing to do with the discharge petition. We subpoenaed the documents for the estate. That's what the victims asked us to do. And what you're seeing is there is accountability finally happening. You've seen at least a dozen very powerful people, men and women, who have already resigned, many in disgrace from their board positions. So we're seeing accountability, but we have a desire to see a lot more accountability. We want to get the answers, and hopefully the next 2 days will be a step in the right direction on our investigation.
Well, emerging from the hearing a short while ago, the Democrats' ranking House member of the committee, Robert Garcia, called on President Trump to testify immediately and for the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, to release what he described as missing files relating to the president.
We want to understand right now where the missing FBI files are. These are files that accuse the President of the United States about serious accusations around sexual abuse. And the fact that they're not in the files and have been apparently either removed or discarded is incredibly concerning. And so we're calling on Attorney General Pam Bondi to immediately release those files. And lastly, I want to also add that this committee has now set a new precedent about talking to presidents and former presidents. And we're demanding immediately that we ask President Trump to testify in front of our committee and be deposed in front of oversight Republicans and Democrats. And that should happen immediately.
Mr. Garcia said Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick should also testify. He has admitted visiting Epstein's private island years after he said he had broken off ties. This is what the Republicans on the committee had to say earlier about the prospect of Mr. Lutnick being questioned.
You know, I think it's a good possibility that his name will arise in some questioning today.
It'll
maybe
be on my list, and I have an email I printed off for Hillary to ask about Howard Lutnick today.
Okay.
Well, we can cross live to Chappaqua now and join our North America correspondent, Neda Tawfik, who's following all the developments for us there. Neda, we're now more than 3 hours into Hillary Clinton's testimony. There was a brief pause, wasn't there, over the publication of a photograph of her inside the room where she was testifying from. Just first of all, bring us the headlines from those 3 hours.
James Comer not ruling out a potential subpoena.
Yeah, well, look, I think it is definitely that opening statement from Hillary Clinton that is still the headline from today. She came in saying, reiterating really, that she never knew Epstein, never met him, never went to his island, flew on his plane, and had no information to offer the committee. Instead, again, slamming this as political theater and saying if the committee was serious, that they would request that President Trump come under oath to answer questions and not just rely on press gaggles where he is responding to the Epstein files and the latest that comes out in regards to that. And she also questions why, for example, Republicans are here in a show of force for her deposition and her husband's deposition tomorrow. But, for example, Leslie Wexner, the billionaire who is really thought to have helped Epstein amass such a fortune, why no Republicans turned up there. So she is hitting back, using this opportunity to not only defend herself, but to point out what she sees as an effort to distract from President Donald Trump and his administration's handling of everything and to instead push that on to the Clintons. Now, we saw Republicans forcefully say that isn't true, but there was that moment, as you mentioned, where the Republican representative Lauren Boebert posted a photo of Hillary Clinton in the deposition, Democrats saying that was against committee rules, that shouldn't have happened, and that the Clintons wanted this to be public to begin with. So there is this criticism that this is all really a photo op for Republicans and not a serious attempt to get more information.
And Neda, the Clintons have maintained since those subpoenas were sent to them last summer that this is all politically motivated. Do you think there is a chance that this might backfire and open up a Pandora's box for the Republicans? It might ultimately put more pressure on them to get some Republicans in front of this committee to testify as well.
So that's kind of territory.
Well, you know, that's certainly what Democrats are hoping, right? We saw them use their opportunity speaking to the press here to say, OK, we have joined Republicans to call on the Clintons to give evidence. More transparency is needed. But at the same time, this means that the committee can now move forward and demand that President Trump speaks. Look, I think for the public, they are going to be looking at these depositions, hoping for some new information. They will be looking at the Clintons' answers, the questions that are being posed to them. They will see if they are credible, if this was worth it. But as you say, it then does beg the question, where does the committee go from here? Should President Trump, who is also named in the files along with the former President Bill Clinton, then be forced to answer similar questions?
Neda, thank you very much for that. Neda Tawfik.
Let's speak now to Amy Parnas, senior political correspondent at the U.S. political news outlet The Hill, also author of 2 books on Hillary Clinton. Amy, it's really good to see you. Hillary Clinton, if you look at that statement that she released, no holds barred there, very clear in her messaging. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking to Clinton sources. I've covered Hillary Clinton, as you said, for years now. They went into this feeling very confident. That's why they wanted to have this kind of out in the open. It was a little bit silly, they think, to have her. It kind of undermines the case for Republicans to have her be testifying because, as you've mentioned, she didn't really have a lot of interaction, much at all, with Jeffrey Epstein. And so I think that a lot of people around her are thinking, they wanted this to be out in the open because of that, because, it would almost like make Republicans look a little silly for doing this exercise.
When she says it is political theater, I mean, what evidence does she have of that?
She has her whole political career, basically. I think that Republicans have always used her as a foil. The Clintons are used to this sort of thing. She, more than anyone, has been a target for Republicans. And I think they still feel like even though she's out of public office, she continues to be a target for Republicans. And I think that's why they kind of laughed at the fact that they were forced to testify today. Of course, Bill Clinton was the one that had the interactions with Jeffrey Epstein, so I feel like his deposition will be a little more impactful.
Yeah, tell us a bit more about what you think we can expect from the former president. There have been those images in the files that have been released of the president, and we know that he did have some ties or is mentioned in these files. But of course, that doesn't connote wrongdoing. So what do you think we can expect?
Yeah, I mean, the big question is, will he remain composed? He has a tendency to kind of be a little loose-lipped. He can get a little bit agitated. He's been known to lose his cool a little bit. But, he and his wife are very seasoned professionals, both lawyers. They both knew what they were going into for this. That's why they wanted to have this out in the open. So it'll be interesting to see what happens and what Republicans, I think Democrats all along felt like Republicans can kind of slice and dice and use this deposition to their favor. But what happens tomorrow and how Republicans use that testimony is the big question.
Okay, Amy, really good to get your reporting on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's bring in our panel. Annika Green, Republican strategist, and Kurt Bardella, Democratic strategist. Annika, just give us your first impressions on what we've heard emerging from this deposition. What are we now, 3 hours and counting?
Hillary Clinton is right. This is political theater, and she's a major player, and she's accustomed to it. Going back and forth, I think it was smart of her to say, let's do this in public. I think it wasn't as smart for her and Bill Clinton to skip the earlier deposition. So it would have been a stronger line if she was just calling for it publicly to begin with. And once this comes out, you see James Comer coming back and saying, well, the depositions are videos, people can comb through those. But I think this continues to be an issue, and it isn't helped by the fact that the Trump Justice Department continues to release things dribs and drabs, right? It keeps the issue alive.
And Kurt, first impressions from you as well. Do you think there's any chance that this brings the prospect of a Republican appearing before this committee any closer?
Yeah, I think Republicans really bumbled their way through this and ended up creating a precedent that Democrats will be all too happy to use and to really hang around the Republican necks now, which is if you're willing to bring a former president, a former first lady, a former secretary of state, a former senator, a former Democrat presidential nominee before the committee to ask questions, then we can do that to anyone, and we should. No one is off limits anymore. And as someone who worked at this committee for many years during Republican rule, I can tell you that the White House is not happy that this is happening today, 2 days after the State of the Union. We're not talking about that speech anymore. We're talking about this. They stepped on their own message. Donald Trump is not happy that this precedent has been set, that now everyone, once these depositions are done, the next question that Republicans are going to have to answer is, okay, when are you going to interview Donald Trump? When are you going to interview Secretary Lutnick? And then for them today to allow Congresswoman Bovart to violate the committee rules on depositions, to snap a pic and send it to a social media influencer that's aligned with Donald Trump is absolutely bonkers. It undermines the entire credibility of this investigation and what they're doing today, and absolutely bolsters the argument that the Clintons are making that this is just a political sideshow.
I'll just explain to our viewers that there was an image taken behind this closed-door deposition. It was meant to be closed-door, of course. That was taken and shared with an online influencer, as you said, who was close to President Trump, Kurt. And that did disrupt, I think, proceedings for some time, as we understand. But coming back to you, Annika, does this really force, you think, Republicans' hand to do exactly what Kurt just said, to put Howard Lutnick in front of this committee and then eventually also Donald Trump?
don't think so. There's not going to be that pressure. They're in the majority. They don't have to do anything they don't want to do. Democrats will make those claims, they'll make those points, and they'll have that picked up by their base, by MSNBC. And then the Trump supporters will not be concerned that Trump isn't forced to testify. It is a continuation of the political theater. And I don't think Hillary Clinton is a target so much as just a player, right? Both sides are doing this, right? Okay, you're going after the Clintons. Well, we're going to make it about Trump. And I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to have former presidents come and testify before the committee. I think the overreach of executive power is something that has been a problem and a growing problem in the United States. And I date it back to when President Obama was in the White House.
All right, Deb, we're going to take a short break and then come back to talk a bit more about the fallout from these Epstein files. So Kurt and Annika, do stay with us. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
And welcome back to The Context USA. We heard a short while ago on the program from Robert Garcia, the top Democrat on the committee investigating Jeffrey Epstein. He's accused the Department of Justice of withholding files relating to allegations of sexual abuse of a minor by Donald Trump in the 1980s.
Mr. Garcia has written to the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, demanding the documents release. The Department of Justice denied any documents had been improperly withheld. President Trump has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing. Our correspondent Tom Bateman has been looking into this for us. Tom, what more do we know?
Well, these files in question relate to a woman who came forward in 2019 after Jeffrey Epstein had been arrested. Now, she made contact with the FBI, and her account was taken seriously enough back then that the FBI interviewed her 4 times that year, according to an evidence log that is in the publicly released files. Now, this woman alleged that she had decades before, in the 1980s, been raped by Jeffrey Epstein when she was aged around 13. But according to Robert Garcia, who has seen the unredacted evidence logs, because like members of Congress, he can go into the Department of Justice and look at the unredacted files, he has said this is the same woman behind another allegation that is also contained in the files, that has also been made public after the file dump, in which there is an allegation against President Trump by a woman who says that she was sexually abused by him also when she was in her early teens in the 1980s. Now, what Robert Garcia is saying is that the evidence log shows that out of the 4 FBI interviews with this woman in 2019, that 3 of those interview transcripts have not been made public as part of the public release. So he is calling for those to be released. As for the Department of Justice, it is said that nothing has been improperly withheld, nothing has been deleted, they say, and they accuse the Democrats of, in their view, making false and misleading statements as part of promoting a political cause. It is also said when the file dump took place in January that some of the documents contained untrue and sensationalist claims against President Trump that were submitted to the FBI right before the 2020 election. They say the claims are unfounded and false, and as you say, President Trump has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, saying he's been totally exonerated.
Yeah, many people who have been looking at these files have pointed to the fact that President Trump is named in the files, but that doesn't indicate wrongdoing. So just remind us what he has said about these files release and his connection to Jeffrey Epstein?
Well, President Trump had known Jeffrey Epstein for many, many years. It goes back to when the pair met in New York, thought to be in the late 1980s. But he has always said that when it became clear that Jeffrey Epstein, that there was wrongdoing involved, that he kicked him out of his club in Mar-a-Lago, he has always said, and since then broke off contact. I mean, essentially the argument from the Trump administration here has always been that it says it is behind huge transparency because of the file release. But what you're seeing from Democrats now is a counterclaim that actually, in their view, we've had Chuck Schumer today, the top Democrat in the Senate, accusing the government, he says, of a massive cover-up because they're alleging here that if there are files related to President Trump, they've either been redacted or withheld. And of course, for files that are withheld, the Congress men and women can't go into the Department of Justice and necessarily see those. Justice Department saying that if anything has been found to be wrongly withheld, they will, of course, they say, be released in accordance with the law.
Okay, Tom, thank you so much for that reporting.
Well, let's just recap some of the repercussions involving others with connections to Jeffrey Epstein. The former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers yesterday said he would resign from teaching at Harvard University at the end of the academic year. Released emails had indicated that Mr. Summers corresponded with Epstein until the day before his arrest in 2019 for sex trafficking of children. No Epstein survivor has accused Mr. Summers of misconduct.
Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates this week apologized to his foundation staff over his ties to Epstein. He admitted making a huge mistake in associating with Epstein, telling staff at his charity foundation that he had affairs with 2 Russian women, but denied involvement in Epstein's crimes.
And the president and CEO of the World Economic Forum, Børge Brende, has today resigned over his links to Epstein. The forum earlier this month said it was investigating after documents released in the United States show that Mr. Brende had dinners with Epstein and emailed and texted him. The WEF organizes the annual summit of political and business leaders in the Swiss resort of Davos.
Let's bring Annika and Kurt back into the conversation here. And Kurt, there have been questions asked as to why there hasn't been accountability, let's say, here in the U.S. over ties to Jeffrey Epstein. At the same time, we are seeing these cases. We mentioned Larry Summers stepping down from his role at Harvard, Bill Gates apologizing. Do you think we're starting to see the tide shift a bit here in the U.S. as well?
Well, there's a difference between accountability in private areas, private companies, private institutions versus the government and government servants and people that are linked to this that are still currently working in the federal government in the Trump administration. It's not lost on me that the person who is identified and mentioned more times than almost anybody else is Donald Trump. And so if everyone is serious about just getting answers and getting the truth, that would be a lot more sincere if Donald Trump's own Justice Department wasn't redacting things that seem to keep his name out of stuff, that files keep going missing, and then we find out, oh, there's a file that should be out there, but it's not somehow. We're going to need an investigation into the investigation when this is all said and done, because it sure looks like a cover-up. Sure looks like someone either at the White House or at DOJ has instructed others to redact as many things involving Donald Trump and his cronies as possible, to weed out the most embarrassing things they can so it never reaches public light. And the law was pretty straightforward. Release all the documents. They're still sitting on 3 million documents they haven't released. They are in violation of federal law. They can be held in contempt. They can be brought to accountability. And that's why we're hearing members of Congress and the Democrat side talk about forming a select committee to investigate this specifically, calling on a special prosecutor to investigate the DOJ handling of the document release and the redactions. This is a thread that will keep going on and on as long as there's a there there. And the way that Donald Trump is acting, everyone seems to think that there's a there there.
Annika, what's your sense of how the Republican base, especially the MAGA base, is reacting to all of this, how they will view the Clintons appearing before this committee, giving testimony, saying very clearly and loudly that they believe this is politically motivated, that President Trump and other Republicans should also give testimony?
I think the MAGA base will expect the Clintons to say this is politically motivated. I think they will also see it as accountability that they're being asked to testify. In terms of the process for releasing the documents, I am all for more congressional oversight, more flexing of that legislative muscle. That is the body that is elected by the American people. And they're supposed to be honestly doing more than they have done in recent years. There's been more and more ceding to the executive.
But if leading Democrats, sorry to interrupt, Annika, if leading Democrats are giving testimony, the Clintons, do you think Republican voters will expect to hear from Republicans as well?
I think they're already hearing from Trump, and many of them are not happy that he was slow to release the files after promising in the campaign to do it, but then they're happy that the law was passed.
Not under oath, not under questioning, though, in that sense.
I don't think that's a distinction that the base is going to make. If you support Trump, if he comes out and says, this is my position on it, you aren't going to be, like a critic would say, oh, it has to be under oath, but a supporter is not going to be holding that distinction. They're going to believe what he's saying.
Just to quickly follow up on that, Annika, what about Howard Lutnick, who had said he broke off ties and then did end up visiting Epstein's island?
I haven't seen any calls for Lutnick to step down in a significant way from the base. I think if there are more discrepancies in that, people who are close with Trump, that may become a drumbeat. There may be a let's clear them out, but there is also an expectation that the odds are stacked against them, that the deep state, and that is very much something the MAGA base is concerned about, is going to be gunning for Trump officials, and that will be where the suspicion first lends itself.
Annika and Kurt, thank you for those thoughts. We'll take a short break and come back to talk a bit more about those talks in Iran.
Hello. We'll take a look at the satellite picture across Asia, and I think one thing you might notice really is there's not much in the way of cloud across the Philippines. Reason for that is the subtropical ridges extending in here, leaving any showers across the south of the country. Many parts of the Philippines, though, will be dry, very warm and sunny over the next few days. Further north, we've got some rain affecting parts of Japan into Taiwan, turning wetter. And we've got some rain across the southeastern mainland China as well. Often the weather will be cloudy for these areas. Turning cooler in Shanghai, temperatures just 13 through Friday afternoon. Heavy showers and thunderstorms widespread across southern areas of Vietnam. Probably see some of those in Cambodia. And I think over the next few days, we'll probably see showers turn increasingly torrential across central and eastern areas of Indonesia, with a threat of some localised flooding building in here. Talking about flooding risk, in Australia, we have widespread heavy showers and thunderstorms. The biggest storms will be across central areas, with several hundred millimetres of rain expected over the next few days. So some flooding is very likely, could bring some transport disruption too. We have had reports of some storms causing some localised disruption in Sydney during Thursday evening's rush hour. Could be a few more storms over the next few days as well, affecting eastern areas of Australia. Storm or two then for Brisbane. Auckland could see a shower Sunday, drier through Monday.
In today's world, perhaps hope lies in something as simple as deliciousness. Seaweed is one of the ingredients that excites me the most. Its flavor tells the story of our oceans, the people who grow our food, and innovative new ideas. And if you add a touch of butter or oil, it can even transport you from Tokyo to Paris in an instant. When we know where our food comes from, how our eating habits touch the world around us, we can begin to really see one another.
News is ever-changing. We start with some breaking news this hour. Let's just show you live pictures that we're getting. By keeping up to date with the latest developments, we can make sense of what's going on. That's why my show is called News Now, because we deliver immediate coverage of breaking stories from here at home and across the globe. By keeping you connected and up to the minute, you'll stay informed as the story continues. BBC News Now.
I'm on a Turkish adventure, combining my love of food with history. And in the country's southeast, the dishes echo the old spice routes, and the stories reach back to the dawn of civilization. Join me, Julie Lynn, for World's Ultimate Adventures on BBC News.
The fearsome display of cartel violence this week has shaken Mexicans who are trying to get back to normal. But what does the killing of El Mencho mean for Mexico? Join me, Will Grant, on BBC News.
We are into the knockout stage of the Champions League season as top teams across Europe try to reach the final in Budapest at the end of May. We'll have all the latest results, features and interviews right here on BBC News, as well as online on the website and app.
Hello and welcome back to The Context USA. I'm Anita McVeigh in London.
And I'm Sumi Somaskanda in Washington. Still to come, Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos is expected to meet with Trump officials as the battle to buy Warner Brothers continues.
Welcome back, and we turn now to the latest negotiations on Iran's nuclear program, and have today's indirect talks between the US and Iran in Geneva achieved enough to avert what President Trump has described as very bad things happening?
In a post on X, the foreign minister of Oman, which is acting as a mediator, says, "We have finished the day after significant progress in the negotiation between the United States and Iran. We will resume soon after consultation in the respective capitals. Discussions on a technical level will take place next week in Vienna."
Badr al-Busaidi, pictured here with US envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner, said after the morning session of talks that the two sides expressed unprecedented openness to new and creative ideas and solutions. The two sides then paused to hold consultations with their respective capitals before resuming several hours later. Iran's foreign minister says technical talks with the United States will begin on Monday in Vienna. Today's third round of negotiations has been seen as a last chance for diplomacy.
Yeah, President Trump has said he's considering what he's calling a limited strike on Iran. The U.S. continues its largest military buildup in the Middle East in decades. A number of countries are warning their citizens to leave Iran because of the threat of U.S. attacks.
Well, BBC Verify has been taking a closer look at the U.S. military presence in the region. Here's Merlin Thomas.
Over the past few weeks, the Middle East has seen the largest buildup of US military in the region since the Iraq War. We've been using satellite analysis alongside flight and ship tracking data to get a glimpse of what President Trump described as a massive armada. Joining the US fleet already in the Middle East is the largest warship in the world, the USS Gerald R. Ford. It left Crete, Greece on Thursday, carrying with it thousands of crew members, a flotilla of destroyers, and dozens of fighter jets. And it's part of a wide range of US assets in the region. Using satellite imagery, flight tracking data, and verified videos, we've been mapping the buildup. These are US naval assets, including 2 aircraft carriers and their destroyers, as well as some military aircraft. Remember, this isn't a complete picture, and these are approximate locations because they're likely to be on the move. There's also US bases in the region. Now, this second aircraft carrier in the region, the USS Abraham Lincoln, can be seen in the latest satellite imagery on Wednesday off the coast of Oman. Now, when we zoom out, you can see the fleet of 7 vessels. Experts have said there are more than enough military assets in the region to indicate the US might be planning for a prolonged operation. One expert said the main questions now are about who will strike first, the cost of the operation in terms of munition stockpiles, and force readiness for further conflicts. Meanwhile, Iran has said it won't initiate war, but that it will respond to any US aggression decisively and proportionately.
Let's bring back our panel on this, Annika Green and Kurt Bardella. And Kurt, we saw the images there of the military buildup in the Middle East, near Iran. At the same time, a U.S. official said after the indirect talks that there was progress, that it was positive today. So is President Trump achieving his goal, really, of moving Iran towards an agreement?
I mean, we'll see if there's ultimately an agreement. I feel like we've seen this dance a few times now, and each time we end up in the same place. With the U.S. Moving closer and closer to war, we've seen a similar strategy deployed with the situation in Ukraine with Russia. And we still don't have a deal there either. And there's all these false starts. I mean, part of that is the nature of diplomacy. There's false starts, there's posturing and negotiation, and people trying to establish their strength and which levers to pull. But ultimately, certainly feels like from a military perspective here in the U.S., there have been real gearing up to try to get the president to take some sort of action. Whether or not that ends up happening, we'll see. But I suspect that his patience is running a little bit more thin. One thing we know this president doesn't like to do is bluff. And so for all the military buildup that we've seen and all the assets that have been deployed, Trump is someone who wants to use those assets unless some meaningful progress actually happens rather than just lip service to make everybody feel good.
Yeah, and let's pick up on that, Annika. Progress, genuine progress, rather than lip service and meeting after meeting. How much patience do you think President Trump might have for this process? Obviously, taking action in Iran, as we've discussed on this program before, is a very different prospect to taking action as he did in Venezuela, for example. But do you think that threat of U.S. military action has been abated for the moment?
I think it's great that he is posturing in the ways that we're seeing, and he's not going to have a lot of patience, nor should he. We are just coming off of the murder of thousands of protesters in Iran. And the New York Times actually just this week had an important expose where they managed to interview medical providers in 15 different locations about what they saw. We still don't have, the international community doesn't have a solid number of the people who were murdered just for protesting, including children. So yes, we're pressuring Iran based on their nuclear program and enrichment of uranium, but there are also people who say we shouldn't let up with sanctions. That's what Iran wants. The regime wants the money to flow, but that could end up being a lifeline, is what some opponents are saying. So it is a tricky situation, and it's in Iran's interests to play ball.
What do you think, Annika, is President Trump's strategy here? You amass an armada, in the region. You would anticipate, as Kurt said, that President Trump wants to use it.
I think he's already using it. So if they don't reach a deal, does that then become gunfire? Does that become droning, more bombing? They did strike those sites last year. They used the bunker busters, which is robustly supported by the MAGA base. It seems pretty awesome. And it did set back their nuclear enrichment capability. So just having ships there, does that mean he's going to start firing? I don't think so. He's wiser than that. But it does increase the pressure on the regime to do what we want them to do. And we isn't just the United States, it's the entire world.
And Kurt, a question, and this has been put to various administrations and various conflicts. Do you think that there is evidence that the Trump administration has a plan, if it was to go ahead with an attack on Iran and perhaps get to a point of regime change, that it has a plan for what would come after the military action?
Nope, I don't think that they do. I think that they generally operate. We saw this in Venezuela. We're just going to take out the regime we don't like, and then we'll figure out the rest later and see where the chips fall. This is, peace by strength mentality, which is a very traditional Republican doctrine, actually. But I think with this president, this is someone who likes to take action. He likes the specter, the scope. He loves leaning into the commander-in-chief part of the job description at a time where things are really unpopular at home domestically, and there are a lot of struggles that he's experiencing, and there's a lot of negative things being flown around, whether it's the Epstein stuff or just the economy or affordability. The area that he seems to feel most in control over, and the area that he can, really single-handedly act unilaterally without needing Congress or a law passed or anything, is being commander-in-chief. And so I think he's just got an itchy trigger finger coming up on the America 250 celebration that he's planning. He's going to want the full use might of the United States military at his disposal and on display. I think that's just how he rolls.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly be watching very closely what happens next in Vienna. But let's come back now to domestic politics, because in the second term, several states have been the focus of the Trump administration's attention. At the forefront, Minnesota. Central to the Minnesota case has been the issue of fraud.
Allegations of fraud involving daycare centers run by Somali immigrants prompted a massive immigration crackdown in the state. Protests against the Trump administration's immigration enforcement spiked earlier this year in Minneapolis, especially after 2 U.S. citizens were killed by immigration enforcement agents.
So questions over fraud in the state have loomed over Governor Tim Walz. He's already announced he won't seek re-election. Today, he's gone further, announcing a slate of fresh anti-fraud legislation designed to combat fraud in Minnesota state programs.
This as the Trump administration is ramping up its crackdown on what it says is sweeping fraud in Minnesota's Medicaid program. On Wednesday, Vice President J.D. Vance announced the administration would temporarily halt some $259 million of Medicaid funding to Minnesota over fraud concerns. Medicaid is a health care program for low-income Americans. Governor Walz is hitting back at those allegations and the decision to halt Medicaid funding to the state.
How does taking and punishing children and elderly have anything to do with fighting fraud when that's not where this issue is taking place? It does nothing, and they've given us no way to try and show that all the things they asked us to do we've already done. They're not even looking at that.
OK, let's go back to our panellists, Annika Green and Kurt Bardella. Annika, do you think that the administration, the Trump administration here, is trying to put the blame on Governor Walz and Democrats in Minnesota for all of this, when actually regular people might end up suffering if their Medicaid payments don't come through?
Regular people will still receive services. Minnesota just won't be reimbursed for it. So it is very much holding the government of Minnesota accountable for what they failed to do, which was to prevent fraud. There were reports, once a lot of this fraud was coming out, there were reports that some officials tried to raise it and then were shut down because the officials in power were afraid they would be accused of being racist. And that was by some of the people who were committing fraud. They said, if you try to report us, we will go public, we'll go to the media and call you racist. And so don't say anything. And so millions of dollars were stolen. Like the Minnesota Medicaid Housing Stabilization Services Program, founded in 2020, was estimated to cost $2.6 million every year. It spiked 21 million in 2021, 42 million, 74, 104 million in a very short period of time. The fraud is real.
Kurt, what do you think about this? Because this is certainly an issue that has energized President Trump's MAGA base. These allegations of fraud, particularly in the Somali community in Minnesota.
Yeah, it's interesting because I bet those people don't realize that Donald Trump is soft on fraud through and through, especially Medicare and Medicaid fraud, when you consider the fact that he issued a pardon to Philip Esformes, a Florida executive that orchestrated a $1.3 billion Medicare and Medicaid fraud scheme. He was convicted of 20 years in prison. He got a pardon. Another person, $205 million Medicare fraud scheme, Judith Negron, got her sentence commuted. Over and over, we see Donald Trump and Republicans give a pass to people who can afford to buy a pardon, and then they go after Somali immigrants. No one is denying, by the way, that the fraud doesn't happen. It absolutely does. It should be called out, stopped 100%. But what we're seeing happen in Minnesota is political through and through, because you don't see the same standard being applied to other states that have massive fraud issues, like in Florida, like in Texas. And again, I don't know how Republicans can say we care about fraud when Donald Trump is issuing pardons to people who have been convicted of committing Medicare and Medicaid fraud.
Annika, would you like to respond to what Kurt is saying?
You can go back through presidential pardons, including with President Biden's recent pardons, and find examples of people who the average person may not have pardoned. I don't think that shows that fraud isn't a concern for one party or another. I would say that everybody should be concerned about fraud, particularly people in Minnesota, because it is a waste of taxpayer dollars. But ultimately, the Democratic talking point that the poor and vulnerable are going to suffer from this is not true. What's going to happen is more suffering by Minnesota taxpayers who won't be receiving federal reimbursements. And I think it's a great place to
Annika,
start.
can I ask you about Kurt's specific point there? Does it make it look like a red state, blue state issue if President Trump and J.D. Vance are going after Minnesota and saying California's next, but not announcing similar fraud investigations into Florida or Texas?
Perhaps they're coming. I'd be very interested, and anyone in favor of small government would be very interested in seeing, okay, where are the top places where fraud is happening demonstrably? Let's do something similar. Bring accountability regardless of the politics.
Kurt, do you think this is something we've actually seen? Gavin Newsom in California also talk about this, and Ro Khanna's a California congressman say, okay, we should also make sure there's no fraud in our state. But is this something where you see Democrats need to change their messaging and embrace some of these investigations?
Everybody should be about finding fraud and stopping it. Like this shouldn't be partisan political. Where it gets partisan political is when the federal government led by Trump threatens to withhold federal funding to selective states. I mean, this whole thing of focusing on Minnesota, if we really care about fraud, we really care about illegal immigration for that matter, Why are you not in Texas and Florida? Two of the three biggest concentrations of illegal immigrants and fraud in America are in Texas and Florida. Minnesota has barely any compared to Texas and Florida. They have 1/20th the amount of illegal immigrants and fraud. So why are we not in Texas and Florida? Maybe it's because they're red states.
Can I respond to that?
We have a very briefly, Annika.
I would say what voters need to be concerned about is which places, red or blue, are actively flouting the law and ignoring what it is. And when you have places that are trying to sign people up for benefits and saying, okay, you're here legally, you're a criminal, but you should stay, that's where the focus goes. It's just common.
Your guy's the one pardoning criminals. I mean, it's like this is where the law and order thing gets lost on me.
You can go back and forth.
Listen,
look at it, it's okay.
It's
okay,
a hugely contentious subject.
I never liked the bargaining pardon, so I don't know what you're talking about, my guy. I'm a former Republican, for crying out loud. I think it's all BS.
I think we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Unfortunately, we are out of time on that particular topic, hugely controversial, as our audience can hear. Kurt and Annika, we will be back with you very shortly around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
The people here in Ukraine are hoping that when the 5th anniversary of the full-scale Russian invasion comes, they will have succeeded in regaining heating and power in their homes, and that a fair and lasting peace, backed up by strong Western security guarantees, may still be within their reach.
The 11th century Cathedral of St. Sophia. Even in the darkest days of the blackouts, the light at the top of the tower shone. But for the first time since February 2022, now, because of the blackout, the light has gone out and the cathedral is in darkness. But despite all, Ukrainians still retain hope that one day soon, the star on top of the cathedral will shine again.
Now, US media are reporting that Netflix CEO Ted Sarandos is meeting with Trump administration officials today. And there's one big item on the agenda. That is Netflix's $83 billion bid to buy Warner Brothers Discovery.
Now, the New York Post has reported that Sarandos is meeting with the Attorney General, the Chief of Staff of President Trump, and antitrust officials. CNBC is reporting that he is not expected to meet with the president himself. Netflix is currently in a bidding war with Paramount Skydance.
Netflix has offered $27.75 a share for Warner Brothers Studio and streaming networks, including brands such as HBO Max, leaving the rest of the firm to be spun off as an independent company. Paramount is now offering $31 a share for the entire company, including the firm's traditional pay TV networks. Regulators are currently reviewing Netflix's bid. And it's important to note that the chief executive of Paramount is David Ellison. His father, billionaire Larry Ellison, is a friend of Donald Trump, and many analysts believe political dynamics will play a role in who gets to acquire Warner Brothers.
But speaking to the BBC earlier this week, Netflix's CEO, Ted Sarandos, said this is, quote, a business deal. It's not a political deal. So let's bring in Annika and Kurt on this. So, Kurt, do you agree this is a business deal, not a political deal?
I mean, I think everything is political when you're talking about this level of scale of billionaires and mergers and acquisitions and conglomerates. And, I mean, I think it's really concerning, actually, that we're having this narrowing of consolidating companies that have massive footprints, massive influence, the ability to reach, hundreds of millions of people. And just a few of them now are going to control all of them. The level of monopolization that we're seeing unfold before our very eyes, I think, is not good for the consumer. It's not good for when you look at who owns what news companies, particularly. I would much prefer a much more diversified portfolio there rather than just billionaires fighting over the same two billionaires fighting over the same five companies. Is kind of what we're at right now.
And Annika, I mean, what do you think this will mean for the media landscape? And do you think that this deal could all turn on political allegiances? Because President Trump has demanded of Netflix that they fire Susan Rice, who works for them, a former Biden administration advisor. Could the deal really turn on that one point, do you think?
I was looking at that, and it might surprise you all. I actually agree with Kurt. I don't like there being monopolies. It's not great for consumers when your options are so limited and narrowed. In terms of it being political, Susan Rice was on a podcast. She was talking about, in actually sinister terms, I looked at the original interview. She said that right now she accused corporations of bending the knee to Donald Trump into the administration, and said that there was going to be accountability if Democrats take back over, and that there would be a long memory, and people wouldn't play by the same rules. They would play by the rules that they're seeing now, which doesn't seem great for making this not a political deal. So Trump definitely fired back on Truth Social and talked about what she said. And I don't think this meeting today at the White House with by the Netflix CEO is going to be illustrative of it being political. Everybody's having to go in and have their meetings, but that's not ideal for consumers to have the president of the United States firing a former ambassador and vice versa.
So, Kurt, if nobody wins, if one billionaire versus the other, is able to win here, what do you think regulators should do?
Again, I think that they should try to broker the best deal for American consumers. I think that's what their job actually is supposed to be. It's not the job of certainly the executive branch to determine who should sit on whose board. I mean, again, as a former Republican, the idea that the executive branch would be that intimately involved in private companies, private enterprises, publicly traded companies. Republicans used to be the party that said, we don't want big government meddling in private sector, private enterprise, that we want to run the government like a business, hands off. The level of meddling here going on is a complete betrayal of what Republicans like me used to believe in.
Okay.
And watching it unfold, I think that, again, if we get to the point where the government gets to decide who sits on whose corporate board, that's not going to be good for anybody long term.
Okay, Kurt and Annika, that's all the time we have on that story. Stay with us. You're watching The Context USA on BBC News.